Welcome, everyone. We'll just get started in about 1 minute. Well, by my clock, it is 12 p.m., so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Wednesday Gatherings. Very happy to have you all here with us today. Today we are focusing on reparations, a history of Black economic resistance, and we are very excited to have our own Reverend Dr. Brian E. Smith, joined by Reverend Dr. Jonathan Brooks today. And now more than ever, discussions of justice and equity are more important than ever. So we are very happy that you are here joining us. We're also very happy that Peter Ricci is here with us, who is the Writing Center Coordinator. Is that right, Peter? I hope I got your title right.
Yes, you got it.
Okay, good. Who's going to start us off here with our way of centering and grounding ourselves into our time together, which we call the words of gathering. So Peter, I will pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's wonderful to see everybody. And before I start off, just a quick little background for me. So I was raised primarily in Chicago's western suburbs out in DuPage County, and I was raised Lutheran. We attended a small Lutheran church there. And when it comes to spiritually how I identify today, I think the term that I'm actually most comfortable with is naturalist. So being completely in awe of the natural world and spending as much time in those spaces as I can. So before we begin this very urgent discussion around economic justice, I'm going to share a brief passage from, of all things, Kenneth Grahame's classic children's book, The Wind in the Willows, which I think captures the natural world in all of its exquisite beauty, perhaps better than any other English language text. And I'm going to do so while sharing some photographs that I took at the Morden Arboretum. And something that I did not realize, funny enough, when I was putting this together, is that many of these images are from the summertime. So, as we have a raging snowstorm here in Chicago, I do apologize for any of you who are triggered by these beautiful summer scenes that I am including. But this is a passage from Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And for those of you who know your 60s rock, that is in fact the inspiration for the Pink Floyd album. So here is the passage. And the only context is the two characters in this chapter, Mr. Rat and Mr. Mole, they're searching for the child of one of their friends throughout the wood. On either side of them, as they glided onwards, the rich meadow grass seemed that morning of a freshness and a greenness unsurpassable. Never had they noticed the roses so vivid, the willow herb so riotous, and the meadow sweet so odorous and pervading. Then the murmur of the approaching weir began to hold the air, and they felt a consciousness that they were nearing the end, whatever it might be, that surely awaited their expedition. A wide half circle of foam and glinting lights and shining shoulders of green water. The great weir closed the backwater from bank to bank, troubled all the quiet surface with twirling eddies and floating foam streaks, and deadened all other sounds with its solemn and soothing rumble. In midmost of the stream, embraced in the weir's shimmering arm spread, a small island lay anchored, fringed close with willow and silver birch and antler. Reserved, shy, but full of significance, it hid whatever might hold behind a veil, keeping it till the hour should come, and within the hour, those who were called and chosen. Slowly, but with no doubt or hesitation whatever, and in something of a solemn expectancy, the two animals passed through the broken, tumultuous water and moored their boat at the flowery margin of the island. In silence, they landed and pushed through the blossom and scented herbage and undergrowth that led up to the level ground, till they stood on a little lawn of a marvelous green, set round with nature's own orchard trees, crabapple, wild cherry, and sloe. This is the place of my song dream, the place the music played to me, whispered the rat, as if in a trance. Here, in this holy place, here if anywhere, surely we shall find him. Then suddenly the mole felt a great awe fall upon him, an awe that turned his muscles to water, bowed his head, and rooted his feet to the ground. It was no panic terror. Indeed, he felt wonderfully at peace and happy. But it was an awe that smote and held him, and without seeing, he knew it could only mean that some august presence was very, very near. With difficulty, he turned to look for his friend and saw him at his side, cowed, stricken, and trembling violently. And still there was utter silence in the populous, bird-haunted branches around them, and still the light grew and grew. Thank you all for sharing that moment with me, and I will turn it back over to Kim.
Thank you, Peter. And yet the light grew and grew. Um, it is good to remember. And it's also quite lovely to see all that green and to remember green. Thank you.
Will return.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. I would now like to pass it over to my colleague and friend, Dr. Reverend Brian E. Smith, to lead us through the content for today.
Good afternoon. Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brethren and sisters can gather together in unity. And what a fitting topic, such a time as this. We're talking about Black economic resistance. And one of those forms that we want to focus on is reparations. Indeed, we have a powerful history of Black economic resistance, whether we're talking about the work of Marcus Garvey, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and the African Communities League, or the selective patronage programming of Reverend Leon Sullivan, the formation of the Nation of Islam with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, or the breadbasket movement led by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King with the SCLC, and of course the subsequent emergence of Operation Push led by Reverend Jesse Jackson. We have an awesome history of Black economic resistance. In fact, many of you know the Chicago branch of the breadbasket movement was incubated in the halls of the Chicago Theological Seminary, where 3 seminary students, Reverend David Wallace, Reverend Gary Masoni, and Reverend Jesse Jackson, were appointed by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King to establish the Chicago branch of the breadbasket movement. This band of brothers, as they describe themselves, came together to organize other faith leaders to challenge local businesses to do right by their Black constituents. Reverend Martin Deppy, a white Methodist pastor on the south side of Chicago, played a key role in the Chicago civil rights movement, actually negotiating a covenant with Jewel Foods, which stands to this day. He is one of the interviewees of our CTS Our Seven Neighbors podcast as a part of the Jackson Oral History Project. And this is a perfect example of the possibilities that emerge when the academy, the community, and faith leaders behave well and responsibly. And so I want to share a brief video that captures the fruit of their labor. As many of you are aware, my family has a bakery and we are authorized vendors of Jewel Foods. And so I want to share a brief video from a presentation from their last Black History Month celebration, one that is going on this year in 2025.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Jim Seidler with Jewel Osco, and we couldn't be happier to be here today with just such a respected community of vendors. This is a big day for us at Jewel, and one of the things that I think most of the people in the Black business community know is that we have been part of your lives and want to support you and your businesses now and ongoing. And I think one of the things that Mike and I talk about a lot, you being on our shelves is part of Chicago. It's Chicago. So that means a lot to Jewel Osco and its culture. We stand by that in every single one of our stores, and there's an expectation for our store managers to recognize their communities, and today is one of the biggest days that we can have.
They say that we're celebrating 25 years, but I want to take you back to April 27th, 1967. Many individuals don't know that the Chicago Civil Rights Movement took a significant turn here, and Jewel is a part of that history. On that date, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and members of the SCLC, Clay Evans, Reverend Jesse Jackson, signed a covenant with the CEO of Jewel, Don Perkins. In that covenant, there was an agreement that the Black community would be served, that Black vendors would be able to have their products on these shelves, and that we would have Black individuals leading in management and working in this institution. And so I want you all to celebrate the fact that we have a long legacy in this space. All of you are a part of that legacy. That legacy that says that we have the opportunity to do business in our communities, and the fact that Black money is still green. So I want you to put your hands together for all of these wonderful vendors, these leaders, these individuals who come together each and every day to provide great products and services to our community. We have genius, we have capacity, and I want to challenge you to continue that legacy and to invite others not to come to our communities to extract, but to invest and to be in a spirit of fellowship. Put your hands together, everyone.
I wanted to give you all an example of what happens when we as faith leaders behave well and when we decide to intervene and become difference makers in our communities. To date, Black vendors do over $4 million of business with Jewel Food every year. And that's due to ministers like Martin Deppie, who thought that they should stand for justice and stand with their constituents. And so now when we talk about other measures of justice, we want to talk about reparations. And our speaker today is a distinguished gentleman, one who I know very well, one fine young man who has focused his ministry on serving others, and his dissertation focused on reparations. And I'm going to read his bio just so that I can cover all of the relevant information, but I do know him very, very well. Jonathan Brooks is a lifelong resident of Chicago and currently serves as lead pastor at Lawndale Christian Community Church and the chief inspiration officer for Lawndale Christian Ministries, which includes Lawndale Health Center, Lawndale Christian Development Corporation, and Lawndale Christian Legal Center. Pastor Jay, as he is affectionately called, is a sought-after speaker, writer, artist, organizer, and community developer. He has contributed to numerous blogs, articles, and books, and is the author of the book, Church Forsaken, Practicing Presence in Neglected Neighborhoods, published by InterVarsity Press. He has a Bachelor of Architecture from Tuskegee University, HBCU, a Master of Arts in Teaching from National Louis University, as well as a Master of Divinity and Doctor of Ministry from Northern Seminary, with an emphasis in Christian community development. He is married to Michelle Newman Brooks, Amakiel. You have to correct me on that. And he has two beautiful children and lives in the North Lawndale neighborhood on the west side of Chicago. And might I also point out, he is a son, as I am, of Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church, located in the Bronzeville community, pastored by Reverend Daryl Person. So I bring to you Reverend Dr. Jonathan Brooks.
Man, thank you, Brian. I take you on the road. That was wonderful, man. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's so good to see all of you here. And you got it right. My wife's name is Michelle. It's just spelled in a very funky way. But I am so thankful to be with each and every one of you. It is a privilege and honor to share with other faith leaders and others on the call the work that I have the opportunity to engage in order to pursue my doctorate. Thank you to Chicago Theological Seminary for the opportunity. And I'm just looking forward to walking through this a little bit with you all. I want you to know that for me, really the goal here is to kind of lay out why faith leaders and why people of faith should be um, not just concerned, but involved in the reparations movement. And then to also lay out some tangible ways that we here in Chicago and around the country can begin to think about reparations in more of a bite-sized um, context versus looking at it in its because it has global implications, of course. And then also to just give some tangible examples of people that are doing it from different ways from around the country and around our city. And so I just want to welcome y'all into this conversation. And I think the best way to do that is to just literally begin by explaining reparations. And there is a difference between talking about racial justice and economic justice, and even Black economic resistance in its entirety, from talking about reparations in its kind of singular understanding. But all of it is tied together. And the great presentation that Dr. Smith just gave us on the ways that Jewel has connected us, even here, and the way that faith leaders were involved in that was something I didn't know about until I talked to him. And so I was thankful for that information. But repair, on the other hand, is a little bit different. And, I think when we think about repair, in the context of our faith, it makes total sense because we understand that repair is actually one of the core values to our faith. The word reparation is defined as the making of amends for a wrong one has done by paying money to or otherwise helping those who have been wronged. And when you think about reparations in that sense, you understand why people of faith should be concerned with the theme of repair, because actually we understand that the goal or the end result, especially in a Christian context, but I think really when you think about faith as a whole, is really returning, reconciling things back to the way in which God intended them to be, whether that be our connection with one another, whether that be our connection with God, or whether that be our connection with creation as a whole. The goal is to bring everything back into right relationship. And so repair is at the center of our faith beliefs. And so if we're going to be people of faith and especially be leaders in the faith space, then we are essentially repairers. That's who we are. And so as we talk about reparations today, I want to make sure that we hold on to that as our center and as our core, that we are called to be repairers. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We are trying to bring things back into the way that God desired them to be. I mean, so much so that when we see, you know, the scriptures talking about what it means to repair in Isaiah 58, verse 12, it literally says that if we will do the things that God has called us to do, it says your people will rebuild the ancient ruins, will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairers of broken walls and restorers of streets with dwellings. But before that, up in verse 9, he tells us how to get there. In Isaiah 58:9, he says, you will call and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help and he will say, here am I. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, if you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you. He will satisfy your needs and will strengthen your frame. He's telling us that we have a responsibility on the front end to do the work of repair in order to get the title of repairers. And so I think as faith-based leaders, we understand that it is our responsibility to do the work and to speak the language of repair in order for us to do the work or to be called repairers of the breach. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the ways that reparations is framed. I had a chance to take my daughter to um, the National African American Museum of History and Culture in Washington, D.C. She was supposed to go with her 8th grade graduation, but she graduated right around the pandemic, and so all of that was canceled. So she never got a chance to visit this amazing museum. And so I took it upon myself as a parent because it's not on the school system alone to educate our children. So we took our own pilgrimage to Washington, D.C. and took a visit to this amazing museum. And when we were there, one of the things that stood out to me was in one of the exhibits, it gave this economic description of the value of the slaves held in the United States for 1 year in 1790. That the value in today's value was over $5 billion. Let's just let that wrap our minds around that. And that's not just the value of an individual and what they bring to the plantation owner and the value of their work, but it's also banks like Chase Bank taking out actual life insurance plans on these enslaved individuals and making money off of them as they use that money to loan, or them being used as property and therefore people putting property insurance on their enslaved individuals. So there is a whole ecosystem of value that's being created off of these individuals that are enslaved that equates to this huge number that we see. And so when we think about the value that a slave held, an enslaved person held, and this is in 1790, we haven't even gotten even further, we can see that there's already a value, an actual number value that can be equated to what we are owed when we start talking about reparations. But what's so amazing about the reparations and redress movement is we aren't only talking about what happened during the time of enslavement. We're talking about the continuum along the Black diaspora of enslavement, Jim Crow, segregation, redlining, contract leasing. And if we want to even go into today, we could talk about the new Jim Crow with mass incarceration, that this is an ongoing issue that has stripped us not only of wealth, but of many other things as well. When you look at Chicago, Chicago is a perfect example of how these things play themselves out. We know that segregation in Chicago is killing us. It has been an issue for forever. When you look at Chicago from a population standpoint, you can literally map out, and anybody who lives here, we know this, we don't need a map to show us, we can just ride the red line from the north side to the south side and see this exact thing play out, that we work together and we play together, but we do not live together here in Chicago. So much so that segregation has economic and investment consequences in ways that often, I'll just say it this way, in ways that make us see that racism and classism and segregation and all of these things are interwoven together. Now, this is not new news to probably anybody on this call, but I want us to recognize the implications of it on us as faith leaders and us as people who want to be repairers. So it's not enough just to know about the segregation and the redlining that's happened, but to understand the actual impact of each of these things. So when we talk about segregation and its impact on the civil rights movement, we know that Dr. King came to Chicago in 1966, lived right here, a block away from where I'm sitting right now, on the corner of 16th and Hamlin, to highlight the slum housing here on the west side of Chicago, in the Chicago Freedom Movement. We know that segregation and redlining was a big part of it, but also was contract leasing. And contract leasing is one of the main things that I studied in my doctoral work, because it was one of the main ways in which disinvestment happened here, where I'm sitting in North Lawndale. Through a study that was done through the Samuel Du Bois Cook Center on Social Equity at Duke University, called The Plunder of Black Wealth in Chicago, in May of 2019, some of the findings were this: through contract leasing, that on average, contract lenders marked up the cost of contract homes 84% over what they themselves had paid. So when our ancestors bought a home, they were paying 84% more than what the seller had purchased it from the white family that they had run out of the neighborhood, telling them, you need to sell quickly because African Americans or Black folks are coming. Right? That would mean something like a white family might sell it to a speculator for $12,000, and weeks later it would be sold for $22,000 to the Black family that moved in. They found that African Americans purchased on contract paid an average of an additional $587 more a month than what the fair price was under an FHA mortgage. Between 1950 and 1970, 60,100 homes were purchased by Black buyers. Roughly 88% of those homes were all bought on contract leasing. We estimate that the total amount taken from Chicago's Black community due to houses bought on land sale contracts is between $3.2 and $4 billion. So when you add that to the already owed $5.5 billion from enslavement, to now, just in Chicago, another $4 billion being stole through redlining and segregation and contract leasing. Through neighborhoods like North Lawndale, which was primarily Jewish, and seeing them pushed out through the onslaught and the welcoming of them into whiteness, right? It is this move from being Jewish, where you are also oppressed, to now being white, where you get to share in the privilege of whiteness, right? It is using that tool in order to strip communities of its wealth. Not only do we not know the full amount, but we don't know what losses we got from insurance overcharges, from property taxes that people believe were inflated, and from foreclosure and evictions that happened through people who didn't even qualify for them because these contracts were actually unlawful. When we look at the total amounts and we begin to add that all together, that's when we begin to see if Black folks in places like Chicago, New York, and St. Louis, and Detroit are going to find themselves back and able to actually work themselves into the American dream in which we were supposed to be given, which turned into be an American nightmare, then repair actually becomes one way that that field can be evened. Now, here's what I want to explain to you. There's a book that I read that I would encourage each of you to get, and I'm going to hold it up for a second because it's for faith-based leaders. It's called Reparations, a Christian call for repentance and repair, written by Duke Kwon and Gregory Thompson. It is a great book. It was one of the cornerstones of my thesis writing. And what Duke Kwon and Gregory Thompson say, it's called Reparations, a Christian call for repentance and repair. What they say in this book that really blessed me and really helped me recognize some things is that reparations shouldn't just be defined as the making of amends of something, but reparations actually should be the repair of theft. They define white supremacy as theft in this book. It is the theft of three things, all right? Our next slide will show this. It's the theft of truth, the theft of wealth, and the theft of power. That's what we've seen taken from our communities through whiteness becoming a thing and white supremacy being in something that we have to contend with. And so if we're going to repair, in order for reparations to actually happen, we have to repair in these three categories. We have to repair truth, we have to repair wealth, and we have to repair power. And so reparations is more than just a check being written to people. There's so many people who come to me and say, well, what if we just wrote a check to every African American? Man, we would just we just spend it right back up and it'd be right back into the hands of the folks that gave it to us in the first place. So how is this helping? Well, we have to understand that reparations is so much deeper than just the financial implications, but it's also all the things that have been stolen from us. Truth, not knowing our own history. The story that just was told by Dr. Smith. Many of us had no clue about the contract that was done by faith leaders and civil rights leaders here in Chicago with Jewel Osco. Made me want to go shop at Jewel more often, right? Because when we get educated on the truth of who we are, it allows us to now no longer fall prey to the lies of white supremacy, that we're not enough, that we haven't contributed to this country, or even things like the places we find ourselves in, or the disinvestment we see in our communities is our fault of some sort. It happened long before we were able to even find ourselves, even in the situations we find ourselves in now. This is much deeper. And so repair of truth. The next thing they say, of course, is repair of wealth. And that's through an investment in communities of color, people of color, businesses of color, schools that serve majority Black people. Like, this goal is to invest in real tangible ways in order to repair the theft of wealth that I just laid out a few minutes ago. And then lastly, it's the theft of power. And that's to empower Black folks to be the folks who make the decisions about how the funds that are invested and the truth that's being sold is disseminated. And so giving power back to our communities to be the ones to make decisions on how we're going to invest the funds that may come back through reparations, and how we want to disseminate and use the education and the truth that comes back to us. And so for me and my tools, I want to repair, and I believe this is when houses of faith really become important in the conversation and the dialogue, all right? And so here's what I want you guys to recognize. There's 4 missional reasons I think the church has a fundamental responsibility to this response. And these come from Duquan and Gregory's book. They talk about that white supremacy's unjust plunder of Black wealth is now, the way we come up against it is an act of transferring wealth, taking wealth that currently resides in white households, churches, and institutions, and transferring that wealth into vehicles designed exclusively to create wealth in Black communities. People who hear this find it jarring, especially when I'm talking to our white brothers and sisters. They find it jarring. Like, this sounds like Robin Hood work, Pastor Jay. Like, you want to take money from here and put it here? But this is what is important. It signals that we are not looking for white controlled resources to help us. It's no longer this idea of we are good people who see your plight and want to help you do better. The word help is actually anti-reparations. Black folks don't need help. What we need is justice. We need access to the resources that rightfully belong to us in the first place. This is why reparations is a little bit different than economic resistance or economic justice. We are saying we want back what actually belonged to us in the first place. And so that transfer is a transfer to the people in which the wealth, the education, and the power belong to in the first place. And so we, as people of faith, we can no longer just be about the transfer of the wealth by any means necessary. We are now transfer of the wealth by truth telling. We have to tell the truth that we were plundered, that our power was stolen, our wealth was stolen, our truth was stolen, and we want our stuff back. It's a very different premise in which we start with. I think the church has a fundamental responsibility because we, in our nature and identity, are a community of love. We are equipped to do the work of love. We have vital relationships in local contexts. Our churches are in communities, in spaces, in places with real people. And because we have a responsibility to participate in a true democratic society. The way that I feel this works out, and this is the work that I did, is as I feel like there are 4 major areas in which we as the church can be held responsible. I'm starting something called the Zacchaeus Fund here in North Lawndale. where I'm using 4 major frameworks: invitation, interrogation, incarnation, and innovation. It comes from the story of Zacchaeus. We all know it. Maybe you learned it as a little kid, as I did in Sunday school at Ebenezer, where you sung and it said, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in the sycamore tree, for the Lord he wanted to see. But the truth of the matter is that story is way more than talking about a little man who was in a tree. It's actually a story about reparations. So in the story, they tell Zacchaeus to come down off the tree. The Lord says he's coming to his house today. Well, I want to let you know that in that story, Zacchaeus actually administers reparations. He is a tax collector who's taken from all of the people in his community, and they don't want to have anything to do with him because of it. He's sitting at a table with tax collectors and sinners, and Jesus is saying, why did you have to climb in a tree to see me? Why couldn't you just ask somebody to get in front of them? They don't like me, Jesus, because sometimes I have to come and collect taxes from them. And it's like, well, that's the only problem? Well, no, I do sometimes add a little extra tax on top of that, Jesus, because I have to take care of me and mine, you know? And Jesus says to him, oh, that's the problem. Okay, well, what's your plan? Zacchaeus comes up with plan number 1. Plan A is, I'm going to give half of my wealth away to the poor. Jesus does not respond to that. He says, okay, that's cool. Why don't you go try it, Zacchaeus? In my sanctified imagination, I see Zacchaeus going door to door, telling all these people he's cheated out of their money for decades and generations. Hey, I'm going to give half of my money to the poor, and hopefully you'll get a piece of it. And grandmama answered the door, and she said, that's all cute, Zacchaeus. But Zacchaeus, what is that going to do for the 3 generations of plunder you've done to my family? You giving half of your money ain't going to do it. We're going to need you to figure out how you're going to help us get out of the hole that was created through your plunder over generations. Then Zacchaeus goes back to the table with Jesus and he says, Jesus, I got a new plan. I'm not only going to give half of what I stole, but Jesus, I'm going to give 4 times as much as what I stole. This is when Jesus responds and says, now, Zacchaeus, salvation has come to your house because you recognize that I came to seek the lost. I came to seek those who were lost. Zacchaeus had to admit he was lost. He had been a thief. He had been stolen. He had to tell the truth. And then he had to repair that truth before the people were willing to reconcile with him. Nobody in the community wanted to be his brother. Nobody in the community wanted to reconcile with him until he gave them their stuff back. And here we are as good people of faith who want to be people of reconciliation. And don't get me wrong, God is a God of reconciliation. The end story of the Bible is reconciliation of all things. But nobody wants to reconcile with you until you repair first. If somebody came into your house at gunpoint and stole your TVs and stole your stuff out your house, and then showed up the next day and said, I was wrong, I shouldn't have stole that stuff from you, will you forgive me and will you enter into a relationship with me? You will say, I'm so glad you're sorry for what you did yesterday. But where's my stuff? No, I don't want to enter a relationship with you until you come back and bring me my stuff back. And so we as Christians want to talk about reconciliation, but we don't want to talk about the step before it, which Jesus showed us in the Zacchaeus story, which is repair. We are called to repair. And to our brothers, white sisters and brothers, our white Christian sisters and brothers in the church, there have been generations of plunder. You have been thievery, stealing our wealth, stealing our truth, stealing our power, and yet you want to enter into reconciliation with us. We want to get there too. But you got to repair first. And so the Zacchaeus story becomes a pinpoint for how the faith community can now live out Jesus's version of what true reconciliation actually looks like. And so I want to give you some examples, right? In my work with my Zacchaeus Fund, what I realized is that we had to develop and mobilize actual ways of doing repair. So one of the things we did on the corner where Dr. King lived when he was here in 1966, there was nothing there for decades. Once the building he lived in was torn down, there was not even a little plaque or a marker that said Dr. King lived here. Can you believe it? In Chicago, Illinois, there was nothing that commemorated Dr. King's existence here or the ways in which he was such an integral part of the North Lawndale community. So our church, along with other faith leaders, got together and we built the Dr. King Legacy Apartments right on the corner of 16th and Hamlin. This is a form of repair. And we said to our brothers and sisters, our white brothers and sisters out in the communities, you are responsible to help us mark what's happened on this corner. And now there's 48 units of affordable housing, space for commercial spaces on the bottom. One of our new restaurants, the Soul Food Lounge, is there. UIC has a space there, and we have the MLK Fair Housing Exhibit Center there, where we get to lift up truth. It is a repair of truth. What actually happened on this corner? Who were the people that caused us for Dr. King to have to come? Who are some of the names of these contract leases who stripped our community of housing and wealth, and why we see so many vacant lots in our communities to this day? It's not because we don't know how to take care of homes or because we're not inept enough to know how to pay our mortgage. It was because of theft. And these are the types of things that faith-based folks can lead as we try to lead repair in our communities. I'll give you a couple more examples of people in our that you should know about if you want to get into reparations. Two sisters I want to highlight. Our sister Robin Ruth Simmons, who's the founder and executive director of First Repair. Y'all, I love the name of her organization, because if you want to see reconciliation, what you have to do first is repair. Us church folk ought to amen that. First Repair. It's a nonprofit organization that informs local reparations. Robin was most known for the fact that she, as a government official, as an alderperson in Evanston, Illinois, where our brother Dr. Brian is, she was the first one to get governmental reparations passed in a city. She got governmental reparations passed in the city of Evanston. To date, $20 million has been committed to reparations by the city. And the goal is to serve any of the Black residents who lost their homes or were cheated out of money. During that time, they received cash payments to Black residents in Evanston who lived there between 1919 and 1969. This is beautiful and has become a mark that reparations is not imaginary, but can actually happen in this country if we begin locally, starting in small spaces like we're doing in North Lawndale, like she's doing in Evanston. Another example is my sister Tanika Johnson, who's a photographer and social justice artist who lives in Inglewood, my other neighborhood, right? She has created a couple of art exhibits, one called Folded Map, where she takes people who live, Chicago residents who live on opposite ends of the same streets across the city's racial and economic divides. She folds the map and brings them together to have conversations to talk about why the North Side neighborhood looks so different from that South Side neighborhood, even though they have the same address, except one just says North and the other says South. She's also started a project called Inequity for Sale, all right? And so Inequity for Sale, on the next slide, you'll see this one, is where she takes these markers and she places them in front of dilapidated homes in Inglewood. And she puts on there the name of the family that lost this home to contract leasing and how much that family would have amassed in wealth had it not been stripped through contract leasing all those years ago. And she places these markers in front of the homes to remind people that the abandoned homes that they see in our communities are not because we're inept and unable, but because of theft. And if we can point this out, then we can recognize the things that we need to do. I'll give you one more example of redress and governmental reparations that's just happened here in the state of Illinois. Our state representative, Sonia Harper, along with other elected officials and faith leaders, just got the Enslavement Era and Redress Act. It was proposed. Now it is on the floor of the House down in Springfield. And it's a bill that will require businesses with ties to slavery to provide reparations. Basically, it's saying if you had ties to slavery, you have to disclose that before you can have any involvement with the state of Illinois and then provide redress. So it's essentially what Jules has done, right? And they're saying that anybody that wants to do work in the state of Illinois will have to provide redress. Y'all, reparations is not a dream. It's not something that's pie in the sky. It is a tangible way to repair the pain, plunder, the theft of wealth, the theft of truth, and the theft of power that we've seen in this country. And we as faith leaders are called to be a part of redressing that theft. And so I encourage each and every one of us to get into the reparations movement, read about what's happening all over this country, and try to be a part of the solution. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm going to stop here so we can engage in some Q&A.
Dr. Brooks, this was an amazing presentation. I just thank you for your honesty, for teaching us through scriptures this notion of repair and responsibility, and then reconciliation. Thank you so much. I want to first point that out. And thank you for referencing the African American History Museum on the mall. I wish that we could bring something like that to Chicagoland. And I'm going to share with you my dream. Maybe we can work on this together. My dream is to go to the Museum of Science and Industry and point out the key industries that led to the expansion of the Western economy, because they deal with that at the Smithsonian. And you pointed out that the human chattel value, and then of course the infrastructure in terms of businesses and the banking transactions associated with it. So you've done an amazing job of teaching us or educating us in terms of truth. And as we open it up to the floor and those that are surrounding us, I want you to talk more about the three ways that we exercise reparations, especially when we talk about education and the ways that you are going about doing that. Because I believe, as I look at Operation Breadbasket, one of their first goals was not necessarily to go and to picket or to boycott. The first goal was intelligence. And that's what you're saying, even with reparations. We need to tell the truth. So I want you to talk about how you're going about doing that. And of course, you're doing like Brian Stevenson, you're marking the territory of truth. And you did that with the building. But talk more about that, especially since we have a large number of educators that are here today. How can they be more proactive?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for asking, Brian. And thank you so much for everybody for engaging in the chat as well. I see your comments, and if I can respond, I definitely will. But I'll say the first thing for me around education, and there's multiple ways to think about this. I think there is the repair of truth through education. So first and foremost, many African Americans don't even recognize how much was stolen from us educationally, how much truth was actually taken from us. And so I would encourage each and every one of us to begin. Now, I feel like I have an unfair advantage. I went to the greatest historically black college or university in the country. I went to Tuskegee University, and every day that I walked across that campus, I was walking across history. There was nothing I could do. Every day I walked past, Booker T. Washington lifting the veil of ignorance off of the enslaved person. I walked past George Washington Carver's grave. I sang in the university choir and learned about William Dawson, the dean of Negro composers, right? Like I had no choice. The Tuskegee Airmen were up the road, right? But this is what we have to do. We have to do the work of repairing it ourselves so that generations to come can know about their truth, right? So I am an avid reader, y'all. Reparations is not just a conversation for me, okay? Right? There are so many texts that you can look up and get an opportunity to learn about what has happened to us through through the theft that's happened that causes us to have reparations. And so lots of texts, Empowered to Repair by Brenda Salter McNeil, who also was awakened to the need for the church to be engaged in repair. All right, this is a great one. Okay, Reparations, I held this one up earlier, A Christian Call, right, for repair, repentance and repair, Duquan Gregory Thompson. Atonement and Forgiveness by Roy Brooks, one of my favorites, because it's a new model for Black reparations. So he's specifically talking about how Black folks can see reparations through an atonement model. And those of us who are in the Christian faith know that we understand that one. This is a new one I haven't even read yet. I just got 2 days ago. Reparations, A Plan for Churches. It's by an Episcopal priest, Peter Jarrett Shaw, who got awakened to the need for his church. And the Episcopals got some money, y'all, to understand that they need to repair for the things that they've done in the past. This is a big deal. The Black Reparations Project by one of my favorite reparationists, okay? And that is my man, Mr. William Darity, Learn about William Darity. He is all in on Black reparations. He's also got a second book, From Here to Equality, right? Reparations for Black Americans, also William Darity. We have to do the work of not just dismissing things because of what we see and start asking ourselves the questions of, what have I missed because white supremacy stole that truth from me? So many of us just live our day-to-day life as if the struggles that we as Black Americans go through is all our fault. Like, we just terrible people in the world who can't take care of homes, who want to kill each other, who don't want, like, come on, y'all, we know better than that. And so it is our responsibility not only to educate ourselves, but to educate the next generation. And that's why I'm a fan of HBCUs. I think our churches should be pushing our kids there. I think that we need to get into our local public education systems and schools and don't wait on somebody to tell you they're going to ban a book. Skip them. You bring the books to your church and bring the kids there. You go to the schools and you teach it as a volunteer. We don't let anybody control our education narrative anymore, because we are called to repair the truth that has been stolen from us. And so are white folks. And we are called to tell them, you don't get to bow out of this fight. This is what reparations is about. All right. So these are just a couple of steps, like, to begin, but it begins by educating yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks. I think I've got some professors online. I know that they're studious, and they're going to take, maybe you'll be even invited to lecture. Thank you so much. Now I want to open up the floor. Chloe, and let me lift up my daughter to all of you. My daughter coordinated the slides and everything. I want to lift her up, Chloe Ann Smith, my daughter, in whom I am well pleased. If you could help me, Chloe, to facilitate the questions. Let me know who has their hand raised, and we'll go ahead and take questions as much as we can.
No questions yet. We're just waiting on people to start raising hands and typing. But as I mentioned in the chat, please feel free to start bringing those questions in now.
Any questions? I see some commentary in the chat. You got some. You got a brother there, Dr. Blunt, Dr. Brooks of Tuskegee. Okay, Dr. Ringer.
Dr. Brooks, thank you so much for your presentation. Wonderful. So wondering if you had any thoughts on American descendants of slaves, or the movement we understand as ADOS, deeply rooted in the reparations movement. How do you relate to it? Your thoughts on it? Just want to,
Absolutely.
Your thoughts, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So absolutely. I think what I'm trying to help people recognize is there are some people who are pure reparationists who really only deal with reparations from a slave redress standpoint, right? And so they focus on ADOS all the time, which I don't have a problem with. I think it's absolutely true. Like, I started off with the 5.5 billion that we see just in 1790. If we were just to ask the government, if we were talking about governmental reparations, because I have a church-based lens that I work out of as well. But if we're talking about governmental reparations, if we just talked about slave redress, the amount that's due, the government actually doesn't even have that amount of money, right? Like, and the government they can just make more money. Like, I have my own conspiracy theories of that. But what I'm trying to push people to recognize is if we only talk about slave redress, or we only talk about it from the American descendants of slaves, two things happen, in my opinion. One, we leave out the continuum and the continual oppression and theft that happens throughout the history of here in America, especially for Black folks. But the second piece is we leave out the diasporal context of Black, restitution, right? We haven't even talked about Africa and the plundering of the continent. We haven't talked about all the ways in which the Black diaspora deals with the effects of this theft, and that reparations are an international conversation, right? This is a UN conversation. My sister, Kimini Uwan, who's a public theologian and a great author, she spends time at the UN every year talking about reparations from a faith-based lens. And her favorite thing is churches owe a debt all over the world, And I think while I'm okay with ADOS, and if people want to fight there and stay there, I'm championing them as well. What I think, if I'm going to get the church involved, because there's so many folks who, especially northern churches, who are going to say, well, we didn't participate in enslavement. I'm gonna go, yeah, but you absolutely had a whole bunch of folks in your church that you were endorsing that was doing contract leasing and paying tithes from all the money they were stealing from our ancestors, right? Like, no one gets to avoid that conversation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? I think we have room for one or two more, maybe at the most. Other questions?
Hi, Dr. Smith and Dr. Brooks, David Johnson. I pastor in the area between Flint and Metro Detroit, born and raised in Flint. Your conversation, there's a book called We the Poison that talked about the Flint water crisis, about the outstanding case that was made, and then how a regime change in the attorney general basically took it and it went up in smoke. You know, I've taught the Zacchaeus thing. When I've talked about it, because I'm from a faith community that is predominantly white in terms of our large organization, but has a significant Black contingent, which is Church of God, Anderson, Indiana. I say, Zach, I mean, we call it woke, but when, you know, him saying he will give half his goods to the poor, that's inclusion. And if I have stolen anything, it's returned to me fourfold. That's equity. We call that woke. Jesus called it salvation. And we've used the term woke as a very dismissive and derisive term, particularly as we have changed the current administration. I'm just so wound up in what you're saying, and I'm asking myself, like, Lord, where do I go from here? How do I, you know, there's a part of my training in industry where the older Black people say, you don't get bitter, you get better. So we just always try to excel above and then get ourselves personally out, but that's not making the impact in the community that we need. But I'm also hearing your discussion and hearing the Fox News talking points that's coming at me in every executive order and saying, where can this go and how can I do something, and will it be effective, or will I just be blackballed as some blackball pun intended, as some radical, you know, person, and so on and so forth. So I know I said a lot, and it's hard to form a question because I was wrestling hard with what you are dealing with, and just having lived through an experience and seen a community that's experienced it, and tried to get reparations and was ultimately unsuccessful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for your honesty. And, you know, just in the essence of time, I'll say this to you. The reason why I will not detach my faith from my reparations work, because there's so many people out there doing great reparations work that's like, Pastor Jay, if you would just leave them church folk alone and just join us, we could get this thing moving. The reason why I won't separate it is because the truth-telling aspect. Right? We are called to be people. Every time we look in scripture and we see the word justice, what's the word we see next to it? Righteousness. Okay. And I don't ever want my work to separate itself from the righteous work of God, even if it's about social impact and work in my community. And so if we are going to be people who are following God's way, then it doesn't really matter how people respond. It's more about whether we're speaking truth and we're doing it in a righteous manner. So I don't base the success of my work on whether people get it and come, or whether in mass people will come, or whether people will start calling me a radical, or any of those things. I base it on whether or not Jesus at the end of it all will say, well done, my good and faithful servant, in him I'm well pleased. And secondly, whether or not those who were supposed to come, that I walked alongside of them. Because I'm going to tell you, every person you talk to, every white person, every faith leader, every whoever, they're not all coming. But if there are some right? And those who you are called to walk with, you have to go in deep on that relationship. You have to repair and lead them down the path so that they too can bring somebody else down the path. Look,
Thank you.
yeah, hang in there. Hang in there.
We have
This,
a,
oh, okay. You have another one?
yes, Dr. Blunt has a question.
Oh, I definitely have to take that one. Go ahead, Dr. Blunt.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, and thank you, Dr. Brooks. Forgive me for not being on camera, but one, again, thank you for your presentation. Phenomenal. I'm involved in this work around philanthropy and the Black church, and how we can begin to bridge conversations. And interestingly enough, this is the conversation that the Council of Foundations engaged in with Black churches 40 years ago. And now, we're finding ways to raise that conversation again. Would like to hear your thoughts about what ought to be Black churches' relationship with philanthropy, particularly through a reparations lens, given that most of our major philanthropic organizations gain their endowment on the backs of Black folk.
Yeah, that's a real easy answer for me. I have gotten to the point to where my role, I think, because I've gained favor in a lot of those spaces, because of the work I've been doing for years, is the bottom line is this: we are called now to disciple the funders. We are no longer called to pander to them and wait for them to give us money. We are called to bring a lens of reparations into these spaces. And so now everybody may not be able to do that depending on your economic space and feeling, and I see you, Kim, I got you. The bottom line is this: discipleship is at the core of all of this. We have to be truth tellers. And so I am now trying to bring people into that conversation. I will say to a philanthropic lender, hey, let's look at the banks you've used. Who is it that you have your endowment through? And let's look at the history of that bank. And let's talk about whether or not they built their wealth or any of their amassed any of the things that you're trying to give to me off the backs of the very people that you're saying you're trying to help. If that's the truth, then let's talk about this as reparations, not as you being a kind, friendly, philanthropic donor.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, man, I know, Kim, we've gone over a bit. I'm going to turn it back over to you, but thank you, Dr. Brooks. You have blessed me on this day.
Thank you both so much for this very powerful conversation. You have blessed us all. We are very grateful for your time and your energy and all that you shared today as some steps, and we continue to take more steps together in community, as that is the only way forward. Thank you very much. And I also just did want to say, and then open it up very briefly, thank you all for who've hung on here past our time, that we do have I think, a very interesting interreligious lecture coming up on February 27th virtually, which is called Religion and Politics. And we have Reza Eslan and journalist Catherine Stewart to talk about the issues of the day. And I think this will be a very powerful conversation to folks on this call as well. If you would like to join us virtually, registration is open and free, and we hope that you will do so. I put the link in the chat up above. That is on February 27th virtually. Are there any other community announcements for the good of the community? With that, then one more final thanks to everyone for being here, and we will see you hopefully again in 2 weeks for our next Wednesday gathering, which is a hybrid, both on CTS and on campus.
Oh, I do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. This is Dr. Iker Coder. Are we going to get a copy of this recording?
Well, we don't send it out, no, but it will be, we're having problems with the CTS website, but the idea is that they are posted on the CTS website.
Okay.
But you could feel free to reach out to us via the website or through Brian, and Brian will get the link, and we can certainly share it when we have it, that if you wish to share it with other folks as well.
Yes, thank you.
But we do record them and they are on YouTube. So we will work on getting you access to that as we deal with our struggles with posting it on our website.
I'll get it to you, Doc.
Okay, thanks all so much. Have a great day.